Hi.
This is Clear Conversations. I'm your host, Sakani I, and today my guest is Maria from Brazil. Oi.
Hello, oi, tudo bem?
I'm good, muito bem. Muito obrigado. Thank you. So, I help professionals and entrepreneurs and companies speak English more fluently and better than their competition and better than their coworkers for international business, even if they're shy, scared, and have a strong accent. I've worked with 250 busy professionals and entrepreneurs from over 25 different countries and many industries, from tech to law, education, medicine, clinical trials, food, quantum physics, commercial real estate, investing, fashion, and I've even had a client who worked with the Mona Lisa painting in France. In fact, he worked with a company that provides the bulletproof casing around the Mona Lisa. It was a very interesting time speaking to that guy. Anyway, I'm also an author. I published over 15 books on Amazon, including Postco, Speak Better English, How to Improve Your English Speaking, Reduce Your Accent, Decrease Your Fear, Even Though You're Busy. And this was a book that I published with a Polish client of mine who is an entrepreneur. So, Maria is my guest from Brazil. And here in Clear Conversations, this podcast is new for me. And I've done it before. Before it was more just kind of talking back between myself and another client. But in this case, or this format today, I'll be asking specific questions, and hopefully you who is listening will be able to maybe get some insight, encouragement that will maybe push you or encourage you to improve your English speaking. So before we start these questions, do you mind telling the people in Portuguese a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sure. So, oi, tudo bem? Meu nome é Maria Eduarda. Eu venho de uma história um pouquinho internacional. Eu morei 6 anos na China, em Xangai, e um ano e meio no Vietnã, por conta do meu pai, ele é piloto. E agora eu tô no meu ano final de veterinária e eu venho falando inglês pela minha vida inteira. Parei de falar por quando eu voltei para o Brasil na pandemia, e aos poucos eu volto a falar. E isso é um pouquinho sobre mim. There you go.
Great, thank you, thank you. And a short little version in English for the English speakers, please, if you don't mind.
Okay,
Mhm.
so my name is Maria. I've got a bit of an international background. I've lived 6 years in China, a year and a half in Vietnam because my dad's a pilot. I am in my final stretch of vet school, and I moved back to Brazil during the pandemic. So I lost a little bit of my English, and a few years from now, I've been getting back on the horse.
Very, very cool. Thank you, thank you. So, because your time is important, listener, because your time is important, Maria, because my time is important, we're going to just go really quick through these questions. I come from a teaching family. My brother was a teacher, my father was a teacher, my mother was a teacher, my grandfather was a preacher. So if I'm not careful, I'll talk a lot, and I don't want to do that here. So let's get right to it. My first question is, many people in Brazil, from what I know and have experienced, they understand English, but they get stuck, they freeze, they get super anxious when it's time for them to speak. Has that happened to you? And if so, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So first, I actually see that happening a lot to Brazilians. I mean, I see it around me with my friends,
Mm,
my boyfriend, and it definitely has happened to me. My story is a little bit different than the usual person. But when I moved to China, I remember having a really hard time, especially in the early stages where I was still learning, and the hard time of like just speaking and always being like and the long pauses and the thinking and just trying to change the vocabulary and the SCNs and the with the pauses and all of that. So it I know how frustrating it can be, and I know how good it can be to not go through that.
thank you, thank you. Second question. How has speaking English confidently changed your day-to-day life, or how did it there's two parts here. How did it change your day-to-day life when you were living overseas in Vietnam and China? And how did you notice it helping you professionally here since you've been in Brazil? Two-part question.
Okay. So, I mean, in China, it definitely helped me because I was in a very fast-paced environment.
Mm,
Academically, I have an IB diploma. If for those of you who don't know what that is, that's basically a teaching method they have from Switzerland,
hmm
and it's very high level, and so it's very fast, and you need
hmm
to really know your stuff. So having English back then was definitely a good English was definitely what helped me get through it.
hmm
Now, people definitely look at me differently when they hear what I sound like.
hmm
I've noticed they look at me like, "Whoa, is she from Brazil? Is she for real speaking like this?" And definitely throughout like my professional life, I'm having job interviews and always, having people tell me, "Oh, okay, well, your English is really good. Good job." And it feels good to hear something like that.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. Was there ever, and this is also a two-part question, was there ever a moment in abroad, China, Vietnam, where I'm sure there was a moment. Let's make it even more specific. Can you tell me of a moment where you felt really proud of using your English in China and Vietnam? Any kind of situation, trip.
Mm,
It could have been a trip. It could have been a conversation. It could have been a convention. It could have been a meeting.
Definitely school projects. I mean,
Mm,
presentations, group presentations, individual presentations. I had to do so many of those over the years, and the more you do it, the less scarier it is. But yeah, I mean, towards the end, you're just like, oh, okay, you're kind of a natural at this. I'm
hmm
doing it for so long. I've been speaking for so long. It felt good. I felt good
Yeah.
about myself.
Yeah. Switching subjects, I know that you've worked with a startup before, American startup.
Yeah.
Can you tell me of a real life situation with perhaps maybe with that American startup where you felt like, wow, like you knocked it out of the park, you pat yourself on the back, where you felt really good about your English skills?
Definitely my interview, to get the job.
Mm.
The lady, when we started the interview, I started speaking. She asked me to talk about myself, and I started speaking, and she was like, "Whoa, didn't you say you were from Brazil?" And I was like, "Yes, I am. I just have a little bit of a different English than most Brazilians do." So, yeah, felt good.
Very good, very good. Now, as I've said, you're not living in the US or UK, you're in Brazil right now. So you're
Yeah.
in the exact environment of the people that hopefully that will listen to this. What would you say to this professional or entrepreneur who thinks that they need to be in America or Canada or Australia to improve their English speaking skills?
Definitely, you do not have to be in that environment. I mean, I've been seeing a lot, like nowadays, we see a lot more American companies trying to hire Brazilians,
Mm,
Latinos, whatever it is, to work online for them because since the dollar rate for us is very high, it compensates. So, and at the end of the day, you could have a lot more qualifications than this person, but this person has some qualifications and their English is just superior than yours. Who do we think is going to get the job? So you definitely do not need to be out of the country to be able to speak well. You just need to want to go after it. You have to want to have the tools and all of that.
right, 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 right. And number five, your journey is different than most Brazilians who learn English. From what I know, a lot of
Yeah.
Brazilians go to like these schools and they take classes forever, but then they
Yeah.
find that they still can't speak well. Your journey was different. I'm curious, and you started young. So when did you realize that speaking English could help you professionally? When did you realize that English could be helpful for your professional career?
Definitely after I came to Brazil and I lost some of my English
Mm-hmm.
and had to speak it again for job interviews. And I ended up realizing that, you know what? I need to have this. I need to be good at it again.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And as I told you before we started, I had two surprise questions. And
yeah.
the first one is, If you could go back in time and you could give yourself one simple message about speaking English, what would that be?
Read more books.
Hmm.
I think books are something that really help us have that high-end, fine vocabulary, the one vocabulary that you're just like, whoa, where'd she learn that?
Right.
And I know I used to read a lot of books when I was in high school for English class, and I spoke differently back then, and I see it that definitely that has a little bit of a, you know, it has a meaning in there.
Yeah. I just I had another surprise question, but I think based upon your answer, I'm gonna share a little bit about my own story because people think, oh, well, you're American, you don't know what I'm going through. But I went through this, my short version is I grew up in America, right? I was born in the Philippines, stayed there for a little bit, we came to America. My English was great, but I didn't do well in English, and I learned how to speak English by reading comic books. I used
Mm,
to read X-Men comic books that my brother would leave around. And at the time, the writer of these comic books, his name is Chris Claremont, and he's British. He's British born American. And the X-Men at the time were a very international team. So you had some people that were speaking like they were from the hood, and then you had, of course, Professor Xavier, who was the most,
yeah.
yeah. So my English, I could talk to the adults loved me when I was growing up. And then I could talk to my friends. It was really interesting for me personally.
Good mixture, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do well in English. I got terrible grades. Like if you ask me where the verb and all that stuff is, I don't know.
Hmm.
Google that thing. But I so okay, so that was my first phase. I started to learn different couple of languages. I move outside the country. I come back, I forget how to speak, and I had to relearn. And it's been a very, very painful process. But what I'm saying about that is you had said that reading more books was what you would advise yourself, what you would tell yourself if you could go back in time. For me, reading the comics and then I read a lot of history books. I read a lot of I've come from a military family, so I read a lot of military stuff, including those comics. And then sometimes in the comic books, the Professor X would talk about a topic, and then I would go and then research that topic. Or
Mm.
really, actually, I would go ask my dad, and he would tell me to go look it up because he's an officer, and they don't really like to give they like people to go do stuff on their own. But
Mm.
connecting with my experience to your experience, something you said specifically. When you, as you know, when a person has that vocabulary that's maybe advanced, that's maybe really specific, it it changes the conversation when we're talking to people. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
um, I
Hmm.
noticed when I moved to New York, even though I went through a very kind of shy period through the summer, once I got acclimated or used to New York, I was everywhere, and I got conversations with all kinds of people, and they were really impressed. I was young. I was like 17, and I'm talking up to people in these types of conversations because I picked up these. I was about to say palabras, like we're speaking Spanish here, but but I picked up these words, so I totally agree. Even though we have all this tech, there's nothing like reading books. Okay, yes, we can read them on a Kindle or we can read them,
Hmm.
on our tab.
Yeah.
But reading is very, very powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And I wasn't trying to take up your time because you're the guest. But
No,
I
no,
but I
all
thought
good.
it did make me think about my own experience and how
Yeah.
reading books. Even now, I have a lot of things around me that are from all kinds of industries and things. And one last thing about the books, I think you'll agree. We never know when something we read may be useful in a conversation with a boss, coworker, client, customer, something we read maybe years ago, all of us
100%.
and
Oh,
being,
yeah.
I've been walking, I've been in our conversations, I've been what's the word? I've been talking about how old I am, right? Since I've been feeling my age, but one thing as somebody who's in their 50s, I can't tell you how many times something I read, you know, something, it can be something obscure. It's very strange. All
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden I'm talking to somebody and I mention it, and then 3 days later they're like, hey, hey, this is so and so. I got this opportunity for you. And I'm like, well, why'd you give it to me? Like, oh, well, a lot of people don't know about, quantum mechanics and spintronics, physics, or whatever it is, right? So anyway,
Yeah.
read books. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. Well, this is the end of our clear conversations. And my hope or my intention with this podcast is one, you can listen to it wherever you are, where you're driving, but the format is not going to always be the same. Today, I was asking her questions. And in the future, hopefully there will be other guests. There'll be some regular conversations. I have a lot of ideas, but it won't just be the same thing. So please come back. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. A lot of people on a lot of people's channels, they go and they benefit from this knowledge, but they don't subscribe. And subscribing helps us out. Also, there will be a link down there below for you to check out the 60-minute accelerator. I don't want to go into a long sales copy to tell you what's in it, but check out the link. There's a bonus. If you buy it before the deadline you see on the link, you'll get access to me for 6 months as your English coach. So please do that. If you're serious and you want to make 2025, the rest of 2025, better for yourself and your family by speaking English better, check out below. Any last things before we conclude completely, Maria, that you want to say?
No, I think you got it all. Sounds perfect to me.
Good. Thank you for your time. This has been Clear Conversations. I have been Maria. I have been Maria. I have been Sakani. That's been Maria. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.